Hi, my name's Greg Pedersen from Little Triggers Research, and I'm going to present the key findings from the Parramatta River survey that we conducted on behalf of Parramatta River Catchment Group in October-November 2016. These results are the key findings from that research. There is a much larger report that underlies this. We're just going to touch on what were the key insights for meeting the objective of making the river swimmable again in the future. We move on to slide 2. This is just an overview of the methodology we used in conducting the research. So we conducted a telephone survey using both landline and mobile phones amongst 1,102 people aged 18 plus. So what we did was we did a minimum of 100 in each of the key 11 LGAs. You can see those LGAs down at the bottom of the slide there, from Inner West and Cumberland all the way to Burwood. So we get a representation of all those because we want to be able to do comparisons between those LGAs. We weighted the data at the analysis stage to make sure it was representative of the region that makes up the catchment group as well, to make sure it was representative. You can see from that slide we got good representations by age of all the age groups, reasonably even on gender. And we did do some post-weighting just to bring that into slightly better alignment. And importantly, we also got a good representation of people who were born outside of Australia and speak another language regularly at home, both around 3 and 10 for being born outside Australia and speak another language. And I think that's very important because this area has a range of different cultural backgrounds. And so we wanted to get views of a whole range of people from the area. And I think we were quite successful in doing that. So let's move on to some of the key results. These slides all show infographics. So I'm going to sort of talk about the main point and also touch on some of the key differences across different groups as we go along. So if we move on to slide 3, first of all, what we want to talk about here is what are people's current awareness and what are they currently doing before we even get into what are their interest in swimming in the river in the future. We want to get a bit of a baseline on what they're doing. So as slide 3 shows, 38% of people from these areas are aware that there are current swimming sites in the river. So almost 4 in 10, when we said, were you aware there are a number of public baths and pools that currently exist in the Parramatta River? Said, yes, we were aware of those. So that means 6 in 10 are not aware. It did vary a bit by age. Awareness was highest for those aged 65 plus at about 51%, lowest for 18 to 24, only 20%. So that would suggest that probably over time, awareness of these public baths and pools has started to dissipate somewhat, and a lot of younger people don't really know they exist. No big differences by gender, but not surprisingly, there were differences by the LGA. So awareness in Hunters Hill was 62%. Of course, they're sort of quite close to a few public pools, such as the Dawn Fraser pool. And it was much lower at areas like Blacktown and the Hills Shire. At about 3 in 10 people there said they were aware. So certainly even at the moment, you would say that awareness isn't as high in those LGAs as you'd probably like it to be, that you can even swim there certain areas at the moment. And we know from when we did the focus groups as well there earlier on, and we did show people pictures, for example, of Dawn Fraser Pool, there were quite a number of people in the focus groups who didn't even know it existed. So that's awareness. What about current usage of the river? Well, of people who actually swim, 1 in 10 claim to have swum in the Parramatta River in the last 12 months. And that was either directly in the river or any of the river pools or baths such as Dawn Fraser Pool, Chiswick baths. We'd have to assume that the people were swimming mainly in the public baths and pools. So that's 1 in 10 swimmers. Of course, a lot of people don't swim. So overall, it probably comes down to about 1 in 18 because a lot of people didn't swim. Again, we saw big differences across the different LGAs. So it was much higher in areas such as Canada Bay at 22%, saying they'd swum in the Parramatta River or one of the pools in the last 12 months. Whereas down to Blacktown, we didn't have anybody who said they had, much lower. The Hills Shire was also quite low. So there we've got 4 in 10 being aware of being able to swim in the river currently. And we've got 1 in 10 swimmers saying they've actually done it. So its usage at the moment is not really particularly high. After we asked people what they currently did, we asked, well, okay, would you be interested in swimming in the river in the future? So what we asked them was, think about the Parramatta River, and we explained where it was, because a few people do get confused about what comprises the Parramatta River. So we said all the way from North Parramatta through to the Sydney Harbour. If there was a designated area that was created for swimming, and it had safe water quality and no hazards, how interested would you be in swimming in there? And interest is very high, as you can see on slide 5. 68% said they would be interested in swimming in a designated area in the Parramatta River. So almost 7 in 10. So certainly much higher than what current usage is and much higher than even awareness is. That interest broke down to 40% saying they were very interested and 28% saying they were somewhat interested. The other thing that was interesting in the results, and while not statistically significant, there was some evidence to suggest that younger people and females exhibited slightly higher levels of interest. And that was also reasonably consistent with the qualitative research we did, where we noticed that females were a little bit more interested, especially those who had children, and young people were a little bit more interested in the idea. It seemed a little bit adventurous to some of them, and I think it sort of piqued their interest a bit, the idea that you could actually swim in the river. So that's interest in swimming. Of course, if we move on to slide 6, of course there are barriers to swimming in the river. Overall, the major barrier by a very long way was pollution and water quality. The majority of the people, this was the key barrier to them swimming in the river. And if you can overcome concerns about pollution and water quality, you would go a long way to encouraging people to engage and swim with the river. So on next slide, slide 7, how do we actually do this? Well, obviously one way is let's clean up the river and improve the pollution. But one of the other issues is how do we communicate it? So slide 7, we asked swimmers, well, what if we published water quality results online? Would that make any difference? Would that make you more likely to swim in the river? And 66% said yes. If you publish water quality results, that would make them more likely to swim there. So 2/3 of people. Now, who do they feel should do this? It needed just to be a credible authority. For example, the EPA, Sydney Water, or even the councils. As long as it was a credible authority publishing this, they would believe it and it would make a difference. And I think that something similar happens with the Parramatta Lake at the moment, where they publish the water quality results. So what will be very important there, of course, in the future is making sure people are aware that information is available and it's readily accessible to them. So we know there's interest, we know what the key barriers are, and we know some of the communications we can do to make sure people are encouraged to swim in the river. What about the idea, if we move on to slide 8, if it was actually a clean filtered pool which was within or next to the Parramatta River? So originally we asked them about a designated area, which was safe without water hazards. Then we asked them the idea of what about these clean filtered pools that filters the extra water and removes all the pollution. Well, not surprisingly, interest went up even more, went up to 81% said they'd be interested in swimming there. And that was split. About 42% said they were very interested and 39% said they were somewhat interested, so extremely high. Again, we saw that it was higher amongst people younger, particularly 18 to 34-year-olds, and marginally higher for females compared to males, but both groups were interested. And also, interestingly, people who spoke another language at home other than English also had a slightly higher level of interest. But having said that, even those aged 65 plus was still at 70%. 70% saying they're interested. So generally, interest was very, very high. So just to clarify, when we just say a safe designated area, which you saw a few slides ago, that was 68% interest. And then when we said a clean filtered pool, it jumped to 81%. Both those levels are still very high, showing there's certainly potential to get more people swimming in the river if this is rolled out effectively. So moving on to slide 9, one thing we wanted to find out in the research, it's not just about people swimming in the river. Again, using the analogy of Parramatta Lake, if anyone's ever been to Parramatta Lake, they'll see a lot of people who go there don't swim there at all. They just like to be by the lake and to engage in that and to use the recreational areas. So we want to explore this in the research as well. So on slide 9, we asked, well, would you be interested in visiting the swimming area which had recreational facilities other than swimming? And interest for that was very, very high. 82% said they are interested. That if there was a pool or a swimming area there but had recreational facilities right near it, and this might include barbecues, picnic areas, walking tracks, cycling tracks, these types of things, would they be interested? 82%, very high. Particularly high for those between 18 and 34 years, once again. And once again, we found people who spoke another language at home were also slightly more interested. Probably the lowest interest for those was 65 plus, which is still at 55%. All the other groups, male, female, all the different age groups, they were all above 80%. So I think this goes to show, and again, we know when we did the focus groups, it's not just about going to the river and swimming, it's about spending a day at the river with your family or with your friends, with a range of people, some who might be swimming, some who may not be swimming, and also that if you have recreational facilities, it opens you up to a whole range of seasons, not just summer. But getting to the point, it's very, very important that you have facilities other than just being able to swim in the river. So what sort of facilities do you need there? Well, there are a whole range that people nominated, but slide 10 shows the key ones really are just the basics. Make sure you've got good facilities like public toilets and car parking. Those two key ones are very, very important. Then there's a whole range of other things that they'd love if you could do it. So picnic areas, children's playgrounds, maybe cafes. Being close to public transport is always a bonus for some people. Then there's like barbecue facilities and then walking paths and those types of things. But you need to sort of get the basics right, and that is having accessible and sufficient public toilets to cater for the demand, and getting car parking. The car parking, of course, makes sense when you think about it, because again, when we did our focus groups, what we saw is so many people complained that they had to drive, well over an hour, often an hour and a half to go to the beach. And when they drive all the way there, then they couldn't get parking. They'd spend 20 minutes driving around trying to get parking and then another 20 minutes walking down to the beach. And in fact, a lot of them decided they'd prefer to go to the Central Coast because it was a lot easier for them. So therefore, if you can improve the car parking at these sites you set up for close to the Parramatta River, that will make a big difference to interest. So we're almost at the end of this short presentation, just on to slide 11. What we also want to know was, people said all these positive things about, as you can see through the presentation, about engaging with the river, either swimming there or using the recreational facilities, but we wanted to know, well, look, at the end of the day, are they going to go there or are they still going to go to the beach? So we said, look, if you could go through the Parramatta River and it took you half as long to get there as it did to get to the beach, where would you go? 54%, so just over half said they'd prefer to go to the Parramatta River. So it just goes to show how important convenience is, and therefore how important things like parking is. Residents have the opportunity to save potentially hours in the car compared to going to the beach, so that's obviously very appealing to them. So that's a brief summary of the results from the survey. As I mentioned earlier, there is a more detailed report, and you can contact the Parramatta River Catchment Group if you wanted more information. Otherwise, thanks for listening to this presentation. This was a very interesting study, and hopefully we'll be able to take part again in research in the future. My name's Greg Pedersen from Little Triggers. We're a research agency and we conducted this research. In our opinion, this shows very, very strong interest in swimming in the Parramatta River. And if this is implemented and rolled out successfully and the barriers that we identified are addressed, we think your main challenge will be meeting demand rather than trying to encourage people to get down there and engage with the river.